Mackenzy Woolfsmith was born on July 3, 2010. She lived in Calgary and lived with her parents Dan and Jen Woolfsmith. Mackenzy's carer was Caitlyn Jarosz. Caitlyn had no formal training or certification in childcare. She did have a first aid certificate though. I'm gonna go through the history of Caitlyn. She is the suspect in this case. Caitlyn had positive experiences in providing care as a teenager and ultimately decided to pursue childcare to support herself. Caitlyn was seriously injured while playing hockey 15 years before this incident. This resulted in migraines and back pain. She had a low-dose prescription medication that she could take at the onset of a migraine that would usually help. Now, initially, she began by providing care in a licensed environment through an approved family day home agency. She was approved by the agency on June 30th, 2010. Caitlyn took her first child in August of 2010, but there was an incident where a child was injured. Because of this, Caitlyn terminated her relationship with them on September 28th, 2010. So within a month, she already had problems with kids. She then began to provide care as an unlicensed childcare provider after this incident. She testified she had been providing unlicensed daycare in her own home for approximately 2 years. Providing childcare was her primary source of income, and that she was now caring for more young children than when she was working with the agency. So when she was licensed, less children, unlicensed, more children. What's going on? She agreed that she was able to make more money caring for additional children, and that running her own business did not have the same overhead and fees that she was paying when she worked in the agency. Now, at the time of this incident, she was caring for a total of 4 children, ranging in the age from 3 years to 19 months. She acknowledged that caring for more children increased her income, but that caring for such very young children was very demanding. She agreed that in hindsight, she had taken on too many children to adequately care for. Now, in the months leading up to the fatality I'm going to tell you about, she was feeling increasingly stressed due to financial and personal issues. She had back troubles and chronic migraines, on average around 4 per month, which all stem back to the hockey incident years ago. She indicated she wished that there would have been more sources of support for individuals providing unlicensed childcare. Huh? What? You're unlicensed, you're providing childcare, and you want some more support for that? I don't get it. Do you? When she says more support, she means through formal government programs and perhaps in a more structured way by agreement among other childcare providers. She also testified she found the process of applying for grants or other assistance complex and confusing. She agreed that she should have sought help for her personal and other problems, and that she had not been feeling well for some time. The isolation she was experiencing was clearly a factor compounding all other difficulties in her life. Now we move on to the incident in question. So on May 2nd, 2012, Caitlyn was the only person with direct knowledge of what happened to Mackenzy. The evidence of medical professionals who dealt with Mackenzy following this incident differ from her account. She claims her account was not consistent with the nature, severity, and number of injuries observed and documented by expert witnesses. Caitlyn testified that on the day of the incident, she woke up, she had a migraine, and did not take the medication as soon as she should have. The migraine was severe and the medication was ineffective. She recognizes that she should have closed her business for the day, but she didn't. And apart from the ongoing migraine, the morning was routine. She provided lunch to the children in her care and was in the process of taking them up the stairs when the incident occurred. She was following all 4 children up the stairs. Mackenzy was the last child in line, 3 or 4 steps in front of Caitlyn. Caitlyn testified that Mackenzy was startled when the dog barked and fell backwards. She extended her arm to try to catch Mackenzy, but she flipped over her arm, striking the back of her head on the carpeted stairs. Mackenzy was crying when Caitlyn picked her up. When she carried her upstairs, Mackenzy stopped crying and her breathing became shallow and rapid. Caitlyn testified that this caused her to panic and that she shot Mackenzy. She could not recall how many times, but acknowledged that Mackenzy struck her head on the floor once while being shot. When emergency personnel attended, they found Mackenzy in severe distress, unresponsive, and unable to breathe on her own. Examination at the Children's Hospital revealed the catastrophic nature and extent of Mackenzy's injuries. She never regained consciousness and passed away as a result of these injuries on May 3rd, 2012. So, fall down the stairs, impact on the floor. Do you buy it? I don't know. Dr. DeMello, an expert in pediatric emergency care and child abuse at the Alberta Children's Hospital, described the injuries she observed on Mackenzy. She found multiple areas of bruising not consistent with a fall and a simple impact to the head. She also found bleeding and swelling on the spinal cord and extensive retinal hemorrhaging in both eyes, indicative of very forceful shaking. These were catastrophic injuries. Subsequently, Dr. Milroy, a specialist in pediatric forensic pathology, was consulted. He concluded that based on the severe nature and number of injuries present, there was overwhelming evidence of homicide. So then police decided to look at Caitlyn's past a little bit more, and there were 3 prior incidents where children in Caitlyn's care suffered injuries. These incidents arose from accidents either involving interactions with other children or where a child fell and suffered an injury. The first occurred in September 2010. She was working under a family day home agency. The second event happened in February of 2011 when she was providing care in an unlicensed capacity. This was key because, licensed or not, it seems she was careless. Now, these reports found that Caitlyn wasn't at fault for many of these injuries. However, they did require medical attention. The first incident was reported to the agency, but no formal action was taken apart from a recommendation for more support. This did not occur as Caitlyn terminated her relationship with the agency soon after. The second sequence of these incidences in February 2011 resulted in a complaint and inquiry by Child and Family Services. Parents of one of the children removed the child from Caitlyn's care. Child care licensing authorities were notified, but the file was closed. Now, Jen Woolfsmith, Mackenzy's mother, she was only aware of one of these incidents. She wasn't made aware of all of them. It was a matter of serious concern, the incident she knew about, but the parents did not have any other sources of information regarding other injuries to other children in her care. The explanation provided by Caitlyn was plausible, and all interactions they observed between Caitlyn and Mackenzy was positive. Jen stated, had she been aware of other incidents, she would not have selected Caitlyn as Mackenzy's caregiver. Now, Dr. Mello testified that there was a concerning number of significant injuries to children in unlicensed childcare in general. She indicated that of the cases of suspected child abuse not involving a parent or guardian, cases coming from unlicensed childcare were becoming more and more common. She was unable to provide exact figures and was unsure of the nature of the care being provided in these moments. She testified that the distinctions between licensed and unlicensed care may not be clear to parents, and that those differences need to be more clearly explained. She was also of the view that the current legislative and regulatory framework made it more difficult to investigate concerns arising in unlicensed daycare. So, police detective Cavilla, he testified that when he took over as the primary investigator, he had concerns regarding the conclusions from the initial autopsy. The initial autopsy concluded the cause of death was undetermined, so he took the opinion of Dr. Milroy, and based on the evidence relating to the death of Mackenzy, the following findings were found regarding the circumstances of her death. Mackenzy was very young, 22 months at the time of her death. Very young children are at increased risk of injury or death as a result of their level of dependence on adults and degree of physical development, which makes them more susceptible to injuries. This mechanism of shaking is one where young children are particularly vulnerable. And despite the best efforts of her parents, there was a lack of independent information available regarding prior incidents of concern with the childcare provider, Caitlyn. Had that information been available, they would have made a different choice regarding childcare. Additional support for Caitlyn would have assisted her in several respects. The absence of added support after the first incident where she was providing childcare under the family home day agency was one of the significant reasons that she left the licensed place and began to provide unlicensed care. Where a serious incident occurs, there should have been a mandated protocol of review and additional support. The provision of that support requires the ability to track serious incidents in both licensed and unlicensed childcare. These factors, combined with the pre-existing medical difficulties of Caitlyn, the migraines and the back pain, contributed directly to the tragic outcome in this case. So, to recap, Caitlyn was charged with second-degree murder after Mackenzy Woolfsmith's lifeless body was found. It seems she got pissed off for whatever reason and she took it out on the child. Such is the nature of the injuries, hemorrhaging, bleeding. I think Caitlyn slammed the child to the floor over and over again because the migraine was getting to her, whatever the reason was. Caitlyn told emergency responders that the girl had fallen down 2 steps of carpeted stairs and flipped in the air. She was rushed to the hospital suffering from brain and spinal injuries, but died the next day. After consulting with the medical examiner and other experts, investigators determined the girl actually died as a result of multiple blunt force trauma. So at trial, Caitlyn was sentenced to 5 years in prison. That's because she took manslaughter as the charge. 5 years. I've slept longer than 5 years. Jennifer and Dan Woolfsmith, the parents, read an emotional victim impact statement before the court delivered the sentence. Jennifer said, "I spent my second Mother's Day going to the funeral home to pick up her ashes." Fighting back tears, Dan Woolfsmith spoke of his continued grief and anger. "I was not able to teach her how to ride a bike. I was not able to teach her how to swim." When it came for Caitlyn to make a statement, she burst into tears as she spoke to the family in the gallery. She said, "I understand this tragedy. This is about your feelings, your loss, but please know I am truly sorry. I really wish I could bring Mackenzy back to you." I couldn't find it anywhere, but I'm guessing by now she's been released. But I've seen hundreds and thousands of these cases. It seemed Mackenzy was the youngest child she was looking after, so she took her anger out on the youngest one. The weakest one. Migraine, back pain, whatever it was, financial difficulty, she was pissed off in her own life, I don't know. For all we know, she could have ran out of baked beans. But when you have spinal injuries, when your skull is cracked, when your eyes are bleeding, that is not a fall from the stairs. So if you ask me, 5 years, she got away with it. Comment, tell me what you think. Jeffrey Baldwin was found wrapped in a towel on the kitchen counter. He had suffered prolonged starvation and abuse. His emaciated body weighed just 21 pounds. His arms and legs looked like sticks. This story may make you cry. It may break you. But I'm sorry, my friend, we owe it to Jeffrey to listen to his story. The child was born on January the 20th, 1997 in Seattle, Washington. He was the son of Yvonne Kidman and Richard Baldwin. While he was living with his parents and 3 siblings, Jeffrey had been relatively healthy and weighed an average weight for a baby his age. Flash forward to just before his 6th birthday and Jeffrey's life had drastically changed. In those few short years, Jeffrey had gone through endless trauma and ended up dying from septic shock and bacterial pneumonia. He had been starved for years and ended up weighing only 21 pounds. His weight was a pound lighter than he had weighed during his 1st birthday. Jeffrey's parents had been teen parents, and many people believed that they weren't prepared for the responsibility of raising their children. In total, they'd had 4 young kids, one of which had already been removed from the home. The Child Protection Services decided to remove young Jeffrey and his older sister from their parents' care, which ultimately led to Jeffrey's death. At that point, the children's maternal grandparents, Alva Bottineau and Norman Kidman, stepped forward and offered to take in Jeffrey and his older sister. The Catholic Children's Aid Society, or CCAS, believed that the children would be safe with their grandparents, as they viewed the elderly couple as well-meaning, and thought it would be a good fit for the children to be with their grandparents. Alva and Norman already had custody of one of Jeffrey's siblings, and they would later get custody of his younger brother. In many cases, children are placed with immediate family members, so that the children can stay together, and they don't have to be placed in foster care or group homes. However, the worker who placed the children in the grandparents' care failed to ensure that it was a safe placement for the children. Had they done a background check on Alva Bottineau, they would have learned that she had a child abuse conviction dating back to 1969. Her 5-year-old daughter, Ava, had died of pneumonia, and when Ava's death had been investigated, the doctors had discovered that she'd had multiple fractures. Alva had been convicted of assault causing bodily harm, and in 1970, she'd done a year of probation. On a side note, how incompetent is that? Imagine I hired a babysitter for my child, and this babysitter had a child conviction of some sort beforehand. That would be incompetence on my part, would you agree? Elva Bottigniu had been through 2 psychological evaluations, and both of them stated that Elva should not be in care of children. After baby Ava had died, Elva Bottigniu had given birth to 2 more children. These children were taken away after Norman Kidman had abused them so badly that the children were hospitalized. He was convicted of 2 counts of assault causing bodily harm. The children had been neglected and abused in a great deal of ways, including their parents tying them to their beds and also forcibly contained in dog crates. Once the 2 children had been removed from Elva's care, the CCAS kept a watch on Elva and Norman's childcare for a while. Elva was raising her 3 daughters, and over the years there were more abuse investigations in the household. That is the kind of place Jeffrey was put into. That's disgusting. Now, in 2000, one of the workers from the CCAS made a short visit to Elva and Norman's household, which had been the first visit in a long time. During the visit, the worker had noticed that there'd been a bruise under Jeffrey's eye, but the injury had been quickly dismissed as an accident and no action was taken to further investigate Jeffrey's home life with the grandparents. On November 30th, 2002, Elva and Norman called 911. They stated that Jeffrey was not breathing. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics instantly became aware that Jeffrey had been abused. He had been covered in sores, bruises, and abrasions. He had been starved for so long that he only weighed 21 pounds, which was less than his weight at his first birthday. Jeffrey had no body fat or muscle tone, and his clothes were falling off of him because he was so skeletal. The boy's death was horrific. The CCAS claimed to have no previous knowledge of the grandparents' child abuse convictions from the 1970s, and they only learned this fact after Jeffrey had died. There had been a record of abuse convictions in the Child Aid Society in their own files. For whatever reason, the CCAS had claimed to have no knowledge about Elva and Norman's child abuse records at the time of the children's placement with them. On March the 19th, 2003, Jeffrey's grandparents were arrested and charged with second-degree murder. On April 7, 2006, Elva and Norman were convicted in court. This all took place in Toronto, by the way. It's the best city in North America for me, and these bastards are not a reflection of it. The sentencing hearing took place on June 9, 2006. Elva was sentenced to 22 years in prison, and Norman was sentenced to 20 years. During the court testimony, details were revealed about the ordeal Jeffrey and his sister had endured. Jeffrey and his sister were locked in their bedroom for up to 14 hours a day, with the furnace vents shut. Their bedroom was freezing cold, and they weren't allowed to have any toys. The room was filled with bags of dirty diapers. Although the bedroom where Jeffrey and his older sister lived in was a horrifying mess, the rest of the house was heated appropriately and kept clean. Jeffrey was often made to drink out of the toilet. His grandparents refused to allow him to use the bathroom, and he was forced to go to the bathroom in his bedroom. His mattress was a biohazard with dried feces and urine soaked into the material, as well as on the floor. Each time he went to the bathroom in his bedroom, Jeffrey would be physically punished, even though he had no choice. Jeffrey and his sister was locked inside the bedroom with a lock on top of the door, purposely installed well out of the children's reach. In the mornings, Jeffrey and his sister were called pigs, and they were forced to sit on a shoe mat in what the household had called Pig's Corner. These grandparents should be fed to pigs, if you ask me. The children had to eat leftovers out of bowls using their hands. They were often also forced to eat their own vomit. Once Elva had gotten permanent custody of Jeffrey in family court, things had changed for the worse. She refused to take him to a doctor past the age of 18 months and refused to allow him to attend school, using the excuse that he was not potty trained in order to keep him hidden away in the house. Elva would continually lie to doctors and staff about Jeffrey's health so that she could cover up the extreme abuse. Jeffrey's sister was allowed to go to school. Some of her teachers thought that something might be amiss because she would often smell like urine. At snack times, the young girl would be ravenous and would eat as quickly as she could. Wow, that is so sad. How many times have you been starving? I've been starving. My blood sugar level has dropped like it does for everyone. And like if I see fries or potatoes, I'm just like, stuff in my face. I've been there. But a child to do that at school? Wow. Although the teachers had some concerns about the young girl, they chose not to report anything. Jeffrey had developed pneumonia a few days before his death. He had gotten bacterial pneumonia from sleeping in his own fecal matter in his room. The fecal bacteria had ended up in his bloodstream, and it had caused him breathing problems due to septic shock. The other adults in the household had not been charged. This was because they were bound by the Child and Family Services Act. The law states that everyone has a duty to report suspected child abuse. The only ones who can be found guilty for not reporting the abuse are people that work in a professional capacity with children, such as doctors and teachers. James Mills, who had been dating Jeffrey's aunt, had been living in the house at the time that the children were abused. He stated in court that Elva had zero love or affection for the children, and that they had only been in the house for dollars and cents, as the grandparents were receiving a monthly amount of $600 to provide care for Jeffrey and his sister. The family's caseworker testified about Jeffrey and his placement with his grandparents. She stated that she'd had zero concerns about leaving Jeffrey in their care because she believed that Elva was a reliable pillar of support. What? She'd thought that it was better than Jeffrey living with his parents, who had been too young and immature to deal with raising their 4 young children. She testified that she had never bothered doing any record checks on Elva or Norman. Elva testified at the inquest, and she stated that she'd found it difficult to parent Jeffrey because he'd had a slow learning ability. Elva gave examples, saying that if she asked Jeffrey to pick up a fork, he'd pick up a spoon instead. What? My son, if I give him a spoon, you know what he does? He chucks it across the room. Ha! That's what children do. So what, you moron? Or if she tried to get him to do simple tasks, the young boy would do things wrong, or simply stare at her, and this angered her. Elva continued to testify that she forced Jeffrey to live in, forcing him to sleep on the soiled mattress in a frigid bedroom and had barely anything inside. Elva and her husband showed no remorse in court for the boy's death, and she had even rolled her eyes and made remarks when she looked at Jeffrey's autopsy photos or heard details about her young grandson. At the time that Jeffrey had died, the household had consisted of 6 adults and 6 children under the age of 10. You had Elva, Norman, their daughter Tammy, their daughter Yvette, and the 4 Baldwin siblings, as well as James and other adults. The 6 adults from the household had done absolutely nothing to protect Jeffrey or any of the other children. When James Mills testified at the trial, he told the court that the Baldwin siblings had been treated worse than the dogs living in the house, and that the other children who lived with them had been treated much better. Mills testified that months before Jeffrey had died, he had witnessed the young boy struggling to crawl up to the stairs to his bedroom. It had taken him more than 10 minutes, and Jeffrey's pajama pants had been falling down because he was so thin. Mills had been living with his girlfriend at the house. He explained that although he was aware of the boy's ill health from his living conditions and the abuse, he did nothing to protect Jeffrey or the other abused children in the household, out of fear that it would jeopardize his free room and board at the house. Others in the house had stated that they didn't want to step forward as they did not want to cause any problems. You cowards! You classless cowards! Dr. Stanley Zlotkin, who had worked at the hospital for sick children since 1980, also worked in Africa. He had seen a great deal of sick children throughout his career, as well as children suffering from illness, starvation, and malnourishment. He was stunned and appalled when he studied Jeffrey's autopsy photos. He wrote about the deceased boy's condition in a report saying that Jeffrey was literally skin and bones. The child was likely chronically starved of food. There was no alternative hypothesis to explain the severe wasting and stunting. Both Elva and Norman had the audacity to appeal their sentences. Elva's lawyer told the court that their client had only an 8th grade education and an IQ of 69. I don't give a fuck what your IQ is. You don't need to be a genius to know you don't treat children this way. Shut up. Her lawyer had made the assessment that Elva was unwholly qualified to raise children, making the argument that due to her low IQ, Elva was not able to understand that Jeffrey would die from the malnourishment and abuse. What? That's a lot of bollocks. What are you talking about? You did this before with your daughter previously back in the 70s. What do you mean you wouldn't know? Norman tried to get his murder conviction changed to manslaughter. Once the remaining Baldwin siblings had been removed from Elva's care, they were put into various foster homes. Though they were not placed together, the children were able to maintain contact throughout the years. They would often have dinner at each other's foster homes and even took an annual camping trip together. Although they had a rough upbringing, the surviving 3 children started to thrive once they were removed from Elva and Norman's care. Jeffrey's sister, who had shared a room with him, had gone to university. His younger brother made plans to go to college after high school. Furthermore, a coroner's inquest took place in September 2013 through the jury's recommendations, but these details were not released until February 2014. The main goal of the inquest was not to put blame on those involved. Their goal was to explore the systemic issues that had taken place in relation to Jeffrey's death. The reason why the inquest took place more than a decade after Jeffrey had died was because Elva had exhausted all of her appeals. What do you mean, all of her appeals? She should have no appeals. Children like Jeffrey, who are left to the mercy of the system, especially children as young as Jeffrey, had needed someone in the system looking after them, making sure that the people they are placed with and that they stay with are safe places. To take a child away from their parents for abusive behavior, only to place them in an even more abusive household, is absolute cruelty. The system failed them, and there are so many other children in the system that have been failed over the years. During the inquest, there were more than 300 cases. The lawyers made the case that Jeffrey was not just an unfortunate child who slipped through the cracks, but that he had actually slipped through what they deemed a whole institutional safety net. The CCAS stated that Elva and Norman's horrific child abuse convictions would not go unnoticed if he had been placed there now. Again, bollocks, that is nothing to Jeffrey. But just a few decades ago, everyone who was involved in protecting Jeffrey did nothing to look into the grandparents. The inquest ultimately decided that Jeffrey's death was ruled as a homicide, as Elva and Norman had both contributed to his death. This was what led to his grandparents being convicted of second-degree murder. They were also charged with forcible confinement. Now, Jeffrey's other grandmother described both tearfully on the stand and later to reporters outside the court how she desperately tried to see the 5-year-old boy before he died. Her efforts all but ignored by the CCAS. She said, "If I had seen what he looked like, if I had seen what wasted state he was in, I would have grabbed him in my arms and ran from the house, and I would not have cared if the police came to arrest me," said Susan Dimitridius, the other grandmother. Susan told prosecutors that she kept trying to see the 4 children but had to get an appointment with Elva, who kept making excuses why Susan couldn't come over. When she finally got to visit Jeffrey and his siblings in 1999, it only lasted 15 minutes, with Susan testifying that she didn't feel welcome in the house and wasn't even invited to sit down. At the time though, Jeffrey looked fine, she said. 2 weeks before he died, Susan told the court that she tried again to see him so she can take Christmas presents to him, but this time she never even got into the house. She described how she was met at the door by Norman, recalling how he wanted to know why she was there and accused her of making trouble. Norman told her, "We don't want you here. We don't want your presence. You're not going to see the children again." And then he slammed the door. Susan said it was such a heartache. She just wanted to see her grandchildren. Badly shaken by the incident, upset that she couldn't see them, Susan told the court that she called the CCAS for help in getting a visit. She said the social services told her, "Sorry love, you just got to book an appointment with Elva." Outside of court, Susan demanded that there be an investigation into the CCAS over why she was blocked from seeing Jeffrey. She said, "I want to know why I couldn't get access. I can't comprehend how this could have happened. As their grandmother, I should have rights. This would not have happened had I been in their lives." James Mills, who lived in the house, also testified, and under cross-examination from the prosecutors, he acknowledged that he lied to police when he said Jeffrey ate more than he did. The prosecutor said, "You're not suggesting that a child whom you claim ate 3 or 4 times more than you looked like this?" As she showed him Jeffrey's malnourished face, he said no. "You knew Jeffrey was not eating." Mills said, "Yes, I knew he wasn't." "You lied to the police," said the prosecutor, and again Mills agreed. "Seeing what you saw over the months, I'm going to suggest to you that Jeffrey's death did not come as a surprise. Alfie Phillips was born on the 26th of May 2019. He had a cheeky grin and was full of energy and life. He was into everything and interested in everything. He melted the hearts of everyone he met. His father was Sam Phillips and his mother was Sian Hedges. They were living together in Kent. Now, after falling pregnant with Alfie and faced with a life-changing decision, Sian made several appointments to have an abortion but did not go through with the procedure. During pregnancy, she saw little of her family as her mum moved to Devon with her husband, while visits to her father became infrequent. Sian also considered adopting Alfie to another family, but eventually decided to keep the baby. He was a normal, healthy baby who grew up and thrived during the early months of his life. The family's progress was closely monitored by a specialist at the local NHS centre, and at no stage did they notice any injuries to Alfie. In the January before lockdown, Sian said she felt lonely and isolated, having not seen Sam for a while, but she voiced hopes of securing council housing to give Alfie a good chance in life. Sam, Alfie's father, already had 2 children. He became involved with Sian in 2017. While living in a caravan his mum bought for him. He met her shortly before her 21st birthday and by the end of the year moved her into his home. But their relationship soon deteriorated and rows would flare up, and they were asked to move off the land following a disturbance. Sian then started a relationship with Jack Benham, though she did not tell Sam or Jack that she was seeing the other. Jack was in a long-term relationship with his former partner, with whom he had 2 daughters. But after the pair split, he moved into a caravan at the back of his parents' home. In the summer of 2020, when his family met Sian, they were told she had been living with her father. As summer turned to autumn, Sian started staying with Jack more and more, prompting Alfie's father to suspect she was seeing another man. He was well aware she had met someone he believed to be called Jack during her spell working at a pub opposite the holiday park. His suspicions were confirmed when on her 24th birthday he found her with Jack at her friend's home. Sam had a huge row, but then they soon reconciled. However, from then on, Sian stayed away more frequently from Sam. During this time, she claimed to be at her grandmother's home and then at her father's house. And although Sian would occasionally stay with Sam, she would go off again, always taking Alfie with her to Jack's caravan. And by November 2020, she was effectively homeless. She divided her time between staying with Sam in his caravan and staying with Jack, who was living in a caravan in the garden of his parents' house. Sian herself had no history of assaulting or mistreating Alfie, and Alfie was generally well cared for. But alongside that, she only really cared for herself. She had the opportunity to provide Alfie with a stable home with her mother in Devon, but instead, she took him with her while she moved between her 2 partners on an almost daily basis. She took cocaine regularly and did so in front of Alfie. Sian spent a substantial amount of her income on drugs. Jack also had developed a major crack cocaine habit. It was the drugs that had brought the 2 of them together, and most of their time in each other's company was spent taking drugs. Additional evidence showed that Jack did not have a cot or essential items needed to care for a young child in his caravan. Blood was also found on the child's sleep suit and bedding, which was later confirmed to be Alfie's. On October 19th, Sian and Jack exchanged messages about Alfie screaming most of the night. Jack said, "Oh, he's just a crybaby, ignore him." Further signs of mistreatment became apparent throughout the year. with Sam becoming concerned Alfie looked tired and pasty. And then, shortly after Sam's birthday, Sian formally packed her belongings and left him, but continued to say she wanted to make their relationship work and occasionally returned. Sam and his mum would notice bruises on Alfie's ears, which Sian attributed to him falling down the stairs. When asked about the ear's unusual dark color and suggested it looked as if someone had twisted Alfie's ear, Sian stayed silent. But even Jack's mum pointed out bruises which ran a straight line on Alfie's eye. However, Jack brushed off her concerns, claiming their dog Belle had knocked the toddler into a doorframe. Jack's parents eventually noticed Sian was staying in his caravan 5 or 6 nights a week. There was another occasion where Alfie had bruising to his fingernails and they brushed it off as he caught his fingers in the dog gate. So that's the history of the family and how the events developed. Now I'm going to tell you about the murder itself. This is pretty brutal. I hope you're ready. The main assaults upon Alfie took place in the caravan during the night of the 27th of November 2020. A number of witnesses told police that Alfie was well and in good spirits. When he entered the caravan with Sian and Jack in the early evening of the 27th, in the course of that night, Alfie sustained approximately 50 injuries from the assaults all over his body. There were cuts, abrasions, bruises, hemorrhages, soft tissue injuries and fractures. These included complete fractures of the radius and ulnar bones in his arms just above both wrists. These were caused by a brutal combination of squeezing and bending of Alfie's arms. How does that work? If you bend your arm like this, I mean it's whatever, but if you were to bend your arm that way to the child and keep going and going and going and going, I can only imagine what that pain must have been. The bones were described by the medical expert as having been shattered by the force of the assault. As a small child's bones are resilient and pliable, it would have required a great deal of force to produce this result. How many of you have children? Sometimes they fall, sometimes they hurt themselves, but they're quite resilient. So for you to hurt a child like this, there must have been excessive force. Alfie also suffered the complete fracture of his tibia and fibula of his left leg. Again, the bone was shattered, and again this would have required the application of a great deal of force. Still further, Alfie's sternum was fractured, something that would have required a great deal of force to achieve, and he sustained several further fractures to his ribs, probably from crushing. He sustained a number of serious injuries from impacts that were directed at his face and his eyes. His head was gripped very tightly, which resulted in heavy bruising to much of his skull. A hand had roughly been placed over his mouth, smothering him, no doubt, to stop his crying. This was done with such force that the frenulum, the skin between his upper lip and his nostrils, had been. Alfie had teeth sunk into different parts of his body, including his arm, his back, and one foot, in each case causing wounds, and in the latter causing a fracture to his toe. These injuries were the result of what can only be described as a frenzied attack. It is impossible to be sure how long the attack lasted, but given the number of different injuries that were inflicted on Alfie, it must have lasted a considerable time. The medical evidence also showed that Alfie suffered a number of injuries some 72 hours before he died. The medical evidence also showed that Alfie had quite a few injuries even before the 27th. These consisted of a number of relative minor rib fractures, which were caused by excessive squeezing, and the fracture of a bone in his foot, almost certainly caused by someone deliberately standing on it. Police believed these injuries were caused by Jack Benham as a result of inappropriately rough or bad-tempered treatment of Alfie. The injuries suffered by Alfie that night were so numerous and so serious that the medical experts were not able to say which of them had been the immediate cause of Alfie's death. He had so many fractures, so many cuts, so many bruises, any one of them could have taken his life. It's absolutely clear, however, that the cumulative effects of these vicious and brutal assaults resulted in his death. It must have taken some considerable time to inflict these injuries on Alfie, and the pain and fear that he must have suffered is almost unimaginable. Jack and Sian were the only two people in the caravan that night with Alfie, and they both continually lied about what happened. But it's clear they planned to spend the night taking drugs and drinking. During the course of the evening, Jack smoked a gram of crack cocaine, and Sean snorted half a gram of cocaine. Together, they also drank a liter bottle of whiskey and a bottle of rum. Jack drank more than Sean. At some time before midnight, he had exhausted his supplies of drugs, so he pestered Sean to make a trip to his dealer to buy more. She tried to get the drugs, but they weren't available, and returned empty-handed. Then, at some point during the night, Alfie woke up and was crying and distressed, at least in part because he was teething, but also because of the injuries that had been inflicted upon him earlier that week. Alfie became an inconvenience and an irritation. They were both angry with him for interfering with their night's drinking and drugs, and were annoyed by the noise he was making. Jack was frustrated that it had not been possible to obtain more drugs, and because of this, he decided to teach the boy a lesson, like he had anything to do with it. The injuries were inflicted in an attempt to control and discipline the child. Jack took the lead and inflicted most of the injuries, including the main fractures. He was the stronger of the two. He had the worst temper, he had consumed more alcohol that night, and he was the one who was most frustrated that the drugs had run out. But they were both involved and assisted and encouraged each other. Sean was responsible for at least one of the teeth marks sinking into Alfie's body. Once the assaults were over, she placed Alfie in bed with the two of them and they went to sleep. At that stage, neither of them had any idea that the assaults had murdered the boy. At some point, whilst they were asleep next to them, Alfie died. They then woke up around 11:30 the next morning, and they immediately realized Alfie was dead. They were shocked and horrified, and then they ran to Jack's parents' house for assistance, but by then, it was already too late. They did not call 999, but that was only because they thought that the best thing to do was to get help from Jack's parents. His mother, Joan Benham, made heroic efforts to resuscitate Alfie, but it was too late. He was already dead. Now, Sean was utterly devastated by Alfie's death.
Okay. There's some injuries on Alfie which can't be accounted for.
What do you mean?
Okay, so the bruising to his eye, okay, is a deformation with one of the wrists. The hospital have also told us from an X-ray, just wait a moment, okay, that there's potentially an old fracture to one of the arms as well, which may have required some sort of hospital treatment at the time, but they can't find any records to show that it has been taken. Okay, that's what we've been told at the moment in time. Now listen to me, I'm not saying that you have done anything at all, but listen to me, just let me finish. Okay, so it's 2:33. What I have to do at this moment in time is I'm going to have to arrest you on suspicion of child neglect. Okay, just listen to me. So you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence. Do not mention one question, some later on in court, anything you do say may be given evidence. Okay, I know what you're saying, and I appreciate this isn't great timing or anything like that, but we obviously got, we have to do an investigation around it.
But they both immediately took steps to cover up responsibility. They lied about what happened in the caravan and maintained their lives through police interviews and at trial. When police quizzed Sean about bruises on her dead little boy, she replied, "Are you joking? What do you mean injuries? I have no idea." At first, they both claimed that Alfie had died as a result of a tragic accident because he was trapped by Jack's legs under a duvet. But at trial, it became clear from all the medical evidence that this explanation was not credible. They then turned on each other and blamed the other for the assaults. In Sean's case, she said that these injuries must have been inflicted by Jack when she was away to go and get the drugs that she couldn't get. And Jack said that no, it was Sean that did this, and she did it whilst he was in a deep and drug-fueled sleep in bed next to her and Alfie in the caravan. And of course, neither of them was telling the truth. But you could take the view that this crime would never have taken place if they weren't under the influence of drugs, which had become the main focus of their lives. So when they were in front of the judge at trial, he was thinking about sentencing, but he took the following information into consideration. You see, Sean was 24 years old at the time, and she was still somewhat immature for her age. She was easily led. She had no previous convictions of any sort. The judge accepted that she adored Alfie and until these events had tried to look after him as well as she could. These are the judge's remarks That statement I fully disagree with. When you're going back and forth, you don't care about the child. You see, Sian was actually born in 1996 and her parents split when she was 9. She was the youngest of 3 siblings. She attended Chartham Primary School and later she went to a school in Canterbury while her relationship with her father was sporadic. She had a troubled youth, having been the victim of serious sexual assaults by an acquaintance when she was 13. Through her teens, she suffered depression, anxiety, panic attacks, and mood swings. After turning 16, she worked at Park Holidays. It was here she met Sam, with whom she had her only child. This and other experiences had a long-term adverse effect on her mental health. Since then, she had a somewhat rootless and chaotic life. Although her mother, grandparents, and Sam's parents were willing and able to provide her with support. And at some point, she did go to see a psychiatrist for help, and he diagnosed her with borderline personality disorder, anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress, and stated that these symptoms significantly impacted her upon her vulnerability. The judge was reading all this out during the trial, and he did take into account her history, the aforementioned mental health issues. But he believed this mitigation was limited. Her mental health difficulties did not explain, let alone excuse, her conduct on the night of Alfie's death. She was not dominated physically by Jack. He did not abuse her. At the time, she was not suffering a mental health crisis. Her mental health history was previously when she was a teenager, somewhat a decade before. She chose to take cocaine and willingly played her part in the assaults that night. The vulnerability and the mental health difficulties that she suffered had only a very minor impact upon her culpability. As for Jack, the judge said the injuries were inflicted in an attempt to control, discipline, and punish this child. I am sure that you, Jack, took the lead and inflicted most of the injuries, including the main fracture. You are the stronger of the two. You have the worst temper. You had consumed more alcohol that night, and you were the one who was frustrated the drugs run out. Then, when the judge addressed them both together, he said it must have taken considerable time to cause the almost unimaginable suffering which resulted in Alfie's death. The injuries suffered by Alfie that night were so numerous and so serious that the medical experts were not able to say which of them immediately caused the death. But it is clear though that when you put all the abuse together, this resulted in his death. It must have taken some considerable time to inflict these injuries. So, as for the sentencing, Sian, for the murder of Alfie, was sentenced to life in prison. And taking into account of all the factors, the minimum term she would need to serve is 19 years. Jack, for the murder of Alfie, was sentenced to life in prison. Taking account of all the factors for him, the minimum term for him that he will have to serve 23 years. Finally, in a victim impact statement by Sam, Alfie's father, he said, "After the trial, we still feel we deserve answers. I will never know the truth about what happened. I never got to hear him say his first proper words. I never got a conversation with him. I was robbed of the opportunity to see him grow up." And you got to ask yourself, what was all this for? What was the point? Maybe they didn't realize what they were doing as they were numb from all the drugs and the alcohol. But as a parent, it's Sian's job to know. I mean, just look at this image of her. She is monged out of her mind. She has no idea what is going on. Neither one of these deviant sperm anomalies should ever be allowed out of prison. Comment, tell me what you think.